Hello, everybody. We're about to get started on this talk by Marco Morales, the Director of Product for Platform at 2U edX. Here to give an update on a big major upgrade for the discussions on edX platform.
Awesome. Thanks. All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm here to give an update on what has been a very large project for a long period of time on upgrading the edX discussions. So for those of you who don't know me, I've been on various teams and areas of the platform in the last 9 or so years, but discussions has never escaped me. So I'm at least grateful that we've invested in a serious way on discussions. But we spent many years sort of just patching and running away and patching and running away. So what I wanted to flag here is that I'm one of just many people working on the project. So you may have heard about blended development as a sort of model for having what at the time was considered like internal edX 2U resources paired with open edX contributions and developers. Bringing those projects together and funding them is how blended development started. So discussions has been already 2 blended projects, and it's soon to be a 3rd as well. So there's still a lot of work to do in the space. The team is listed here, and moving forward, the primary point of contact on the product side is Amir Youb, who oversees as the direct product manager the effort. And flagging here as well that like a key contributor and partner has been OpenCraft in the development of this work as well. So what I'm going to do quickly is talk about the role of discussions and why it matters to invest in the discussion forums, some of the opportunities and problems that we've identified, and then what lies ahead. So what we're working on, what's being built and added both now and next. So the role of discussion forums. So discussion forums are one of the primary ways to take a static content experience, sort of the sequence of or learning sequences in a MOOC, and give to it social presence, teaching presence, and community, a sense of community and belonging, right? So it's a way to help people connect to peers in a way that doesn't make them feel like they're learning on an island by themselves, which is often the experience that learners might feel in a MOOC context. So this model was research from about 2000, talking about how all these different elements need to be present for an effective learning environment. And so talking a little bit about the people, I have just here an abridged summary of some of the personas that we've generated for the discussion forums. And this is why it's such a challenge to develop discussion forums for a learning context and why it's not the same as just dropping in discussion fora of old or just dropping in Slack or just dropping in other things that may not necessarily be built for the learning context. So just as an example here, this is Sarah, staff shepherd, and Michelle, the forum mom. These 2 personas that have certain kind of engagement patterns with the discussion forums and have certain workflows that need to help them enable others, right? Nico, the forum support net, and Lily, the motivated learner, are a lot more the glue that makes discussion continue. These are individuals that they may not be community TAs, they may not be people that are a part of the official course staff, but they might as well be, because when you look at the activity, they're people that are not just in the course to learn the course, but they'll actually go to the main discussion forum to look and see how they can help. And that is a part of their learning experience as much as anything else. And these personas and users have even different needs than the moderation group on the left. And then finally, unfortunately, the most common are often these last 2 areas. So you have Oliver, the orphan poster, who said, "Hey, I have a problem." Silence, nothing else. And no one realized or noticed. Or Aman, the problem affirmer, who's focused on getting through the course, but if they run into a problem, they're going to search the forums, say like, "Oh, that's the problem. +1, I have that problem too." Or "Hey, this is a problem, fix it." And their focus is not necessarily on engaging in the fora, and you see they have less lit up in red here. They're mostly trying to get a problem solved fast. Get in, get out, get back to the content. So all these different things. I didn't even include Larry the lurker and a bunch of others because you don't have them on the discussion forum, so you don't even know who they are. But the point is there's a really wide range, And ideally, you have a discussion experience that can support all these different people and all these different levels, and if possible, help motivate some of those people to be the next one up in terms of engagement from right to left. So, said simply, the discussion forums have had many issues over the years, but this is a single sentence that summarizes the challenge. So, as a student on the discussion forums, it is difficult to find the appropriate context, get answers, and continue discussion. The reason why this is here to set up the framing is that if we go back to that community of inquiry model and we look at, what is it going to take to thoughtfully select content, set climate, and support discourse? Well, if you can't find yourself and navigate to the right discussions and conversation, then you're not going to be getting to the right content. So the select content isn't happening. If you can't get answers, right, and you connect those answers back to the learning content, that's also sort of at the intersection of social and teaching presence. And then finally, continuing discussion is sort of making you feel like you're not alone. So you can look at, from lots of different perspectives, what the research says is thoughtful online learning communities and what we're identifying as a challenge based on interviews and studies and whatnot. It's a very simplified version of this, but the reason this matters is, again, just another way of visualizing how different people that use the discussions experience are going to operate on different areas of this model, right? Michelle and Sarah need these inner areas to be working and connected so that folks on the other end of the spectrum, like Oliver and Aman, can actually connect to the middle instead of just being off by themselves in these other areas. So that's a little bit about what the challenges are, very simplified, of course. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the opportunities and problems in the discussion forum. So there's 3 areas that I want to highlight. So leaning into in-context discussions, what does that mean? So what we found is that over the years on edX, we've had partners that have explored and tried using third-party discussion tools. This is data that's a couple years old now, but about 70% of courses that use third-party discussion forums stop using third-party discussion forums 1 or 2 runs after they start. And the most commonly cited reasons are, well, cost is one. Obviously, free 99 is a better price than paid, right? So using the edX native discussions is that for our partners. And also the in-context discussion is commonly called out as one of the gaps, right? Like having students have to go somewhere else for the discussion experience separate from the content makes that experience a lot more disconnected than you'd expect. Even in situations where it's very clear that that third-party discussion forum had better experience, better notifications, honestly, just a better overall aesthetic and layout and everything else. Even in those situations, the lack of context and content connection wound up, in addition to price, being why people sort of abandoned the third-party tool. It's also not particularly easy to integrate, and so that gets us to the next section, enabling third-party integration. So making it easy and an option for anyone to use whatever discussion forum tool they want is important, right? We want to give people flexibility and choice. And so there's a bunch of work we've done in that space. But one final thing I want to mention before I forget about in-context discussion is the discussion module is one of the most popular and commonly configured blocks on edX. You got video, problem, text, it's 86% of everything, and then discussions and LTI. And Aura is also on that list. So it's a very commonly used block, but what we found is that the courses that make the most thorough use of in-context discussion tend to be our oldest courses, cough, cough, MIT, and others that put the effort into configuring very difficult to configure in-context discussion, where you have to replicate the hierarchy of the course and text and configure the discussion blocks. So increasingly what we found is that most courses that actually have in-context discussion have it in less than 20% of their course now. And so I'll talk a little bit about what we're trying to do to help change that. But the final thing I want to talk about is just the core discussions experience itself needed a major lift both in navigation and in moderation tools, trying to sort of reduce the cost to monitor effective discussions, going back to that community of inquiry model. So, very quick run through on the first 2 sections. because most of the time is being spent today on mockups, basically, and screenshots. And so this is what lies ahead. This first bit here and the stuff early on are things that we've already merged into the platform and has been in the code base. Our new course authoring micro frontend has a centralized space to configure applications. So there's centralized configuration, and it's a move away from having settings be located everywhere. And so discussions was just one part of this update. But we did this work in order to help enable future app categories, not just discussions. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what this does, but essentially, when you're running this new course authoring micro frontend, the page and resources view lets you, for discussion forums, select between not only edX discussions, but a number of other providers. I realize now that Discourse is not quite like set up and fully ready, but all the others listed there are available. And so it's essentially taking advantage of LTI configuration, but we've done some work to hopefully enable richer integrations over time. So what does that mean? That means that we've centralized all the discussion settings in one place and have a consistent API for those. So settings for in-context discussion, anonymous posts, cohorts, and any other features that we add to the discussion forums, moderator emails and other things, we can have settings for those in one place, right? And ideally, moving forward, any LTI integration, we should be able to empower those companies to also leverage these settings and configurations so that the difference between the current edX discussion experience and the features that we think are critical and what this third-party tool can offer can be reduced over time, right? Like ultimately, we want people to have whatever choice they want. And even though we've uncovered that a lot of folks switch back to our discussion forums, a lot of that has to do, we think, with in-context discussion and a bunch of these other things that they're not quite able to integrate into the experience, or they don't know if learners are on the paid track or not, or other details that hopefully things like this and additional data would solve. So while we're here, what I wanted to mention too is that the work we've done here also enables additional application categories, right? So one category that we added literally just in the last month is a new one called Live. And what that lets you do is configure, right now it's only Zoom, but it lets you, similar to the LTI configuration we talked about for discussions, put in your LTI details for Zoom, and it adds a tab at the top of your course called Live, and it embeds the Zoom experience. You can imagine similarly dropping in a big blue button, a number of other options here for this. And the reason this is here is because hopefully this moves our course application experience to much more of an obvious marketplace and known providers with rich integrations and sort of awareness of all the settings that are coming out of that application category. Next up, I want to talk about the core discussions experience and what's going on there. So we'll get to this at the end as well, but what we've been doing is building the front end of the new discussions experience. The reason that's important is that means we've not moved away from the Ruby-based CS comment service. We've not moved away from the Django middleware that's in edX platform. Those are things that we'd like to do to decouple and for a lot of other reasons. But for the time being, most of our focus has been on the educator configuration and the learner and educator experience in the main discussion application, as well as in-context discussion, which we'll get to. So what the experience looks like today, we'll dive through in more detail, but we do have a way for this application to be configured as a preview. So if an OpenEdX instance wants to let educators see the new experience, educators will be able to toggle between the old and the new and compare and provide feedback on what potential gaps are before switching to the new one. So it's a way for you to sort of ease people into the new experience and also a way to capture feedback. Okay, so in this core discussion experience, one of the things we want to cover up top is the navigation. So the navigation is oriented around, first, your personal context. So My Posts is the first tab. If you've engaged in any discussion forum, created post and anything, that's what's in the My Post area. In the current, what we're calling now the legacy discussions experience, You can technically get to your My Active Posts. If you click your username, that takes you to basically that view. It's just buried and no one knows about it, right? So it's technically possible, but we're making that be the front and center view. So when someone comes back to the discussion experience, if they have activity, they'll land there and get to see any updates or other things that have happened in posts they care about. Of course, they can still get to all posts. That view is still important. And the experience of browsing topics as well in the navigation of the course is something we've also put a bunch of effort into to improve, because as we'll talk about in a second, we're moving to a world where courses can default into having in-context discussions set up for them. And so the topics now wind up echoing the course structure, which is pretty big and complicated in a deep tree. So that's why we did put a bunch of effort into the topic navigation. And then finally, a way to look at learners and look at the people involved in the discussion forum, while it may not be the primary place, it's certainly a goal of the discussion experience to find and connect with people. So the Learners tab we'll get to is a way of sort of elevating the human side of the discussion community. And it also is a way for other learners to see the most active contributors. It in some ways helps reinforce that Michelle the forum mom or Nico the support net kind of roles and personas of people who are active and contributing, and it has some incremental minor sort of badge or status or sort of like visibility basically for being an active, top 10 people who are contributing and engaging in the discussion forums, for example. We're also looking at adding a moderator area, although I don't have any visuals to show for that, something that will actually let us see moderator activity to enable course teams to track average response times on posts, sort of certain key metrics, activity levels by all the moderators, so you can understand, is my moderation team doing what it needs to? And if not, how can I improve it? Particularly relevant for obviously like the MOOC scale on larger courses. Post listing, so how is that changing? So adding in profile avatars is the first most obvious change. It sort of humanizes the experience across the posts and the listing. Ability to do quick actions, follow posts, redesigned filtering tools, and better visibility into when things are staff posts, answered, reported, pinned, all that. So the filtering menu here also shows you sort of a redesigned take on how to give people options into the specific view they want to look at. So we're getting people to see all discussion posts if you're in all discussions, but if you want to just focus in on a fraction of like what's unread, what's reported, what's unanswered, you can do that, sorting it different ways or filtering it different ways. But what we're also planning to do is have moderators default to certain filters, right, in certain cases, since those sorts and filters and views are the primary concern for them generally. Try and get in, understand where they need to immediately help and support, and then if they want to look at other stuff, they obviously can. But here we go. So next, I want to talk about in-context discussion. So streamlining the configuration means letting discussions be bound to a specific content page. So you see here a sidebar that is available for a given page in the course, and the plan is to sort of let you shift to a world where every non-proctored exams learning sequence, non-timed exam learning sequence, and ungraded content just configures an in-context discussion block for you when you start the course. So this discussion sidebar here on the right can be expanded or collapsed, and you'll see questions, discussions, posts specific to that page in the course. There's also a way for people to not make the discussions be bound to a specific page, but instead be bound to a specific learning sequence. Not always is an individual page the right scope for discussion. You might want to have conversations across the entire learning sequence, and you just happen to split up the ideas in that across multiple pages. But whether you're doing it by unit page or by learning sequence, the idea is that you're no longer configuring discussion blocks in every single page you want it. You just sort of have it ever present for students. Next, I want to talk about a new thing, which is in-context support. This is not yet in the code, and increasingly from this point on, I'm talking about things that are not fully developed and in there, and now it's like what lies ahead and what we're hopeful to have in Olive. So there's a fair amount of work that comes into the workflows for when students report help or other issues in their course through our help center. We use a Zendesk help center, the help button at the top of the header, which actually is conspicuously missing in this mockup. But that workflow isn't tied to a course, isn't tied to a page. It's sort of isolated, and it's a lot lower satisfaction from learners when they go through those workflows because it takes so long, right? So what we're thinking about introducing and testing is a new post type called a bug or issue, a content issue, for learners to, when they're actually prompted for ask for help, they will get to an experience that lets them pick between, is this a question about the course content, or is this something about just how the platform works, and thoughtfully route people to the right, like search for articles and references, both in discussion forums and in our Help Center articles for learners. But it's also possible for people to create this. The idea would be that learners would be able to create this new post type. And what that does is that creates a slightly different post where moderators can review those, but a learner can say like, hey, the answer is wrong here. The answer should be this, not this. And they can post that in the discussion forums without it resulting in like, oh, now the right answer is shared and it's wrong. And whether or not a student is right or not, this new post type we hope will really streamline a bunch of the moderation workflows and the ability for a course team to address what happens sometimes, which is like misconfiguration or errors in the course content, whatever that may be. And so more work to do on the discovery for how that would work, but that's something we're looking to add as well. And then want to talk about sort of learner activity in general. This is the Learners tab that I alluded to earlier, letting you see different learners, not only if they have reported content, but also just sort of understand sort of the total sum of all their post responses and comments. Again, letting you filter students as well. Moderation tools we're trying to shift to being in context where possible. So give visibility into posts and whether or not they're reported in the post listing view. On the Learners tab, letting you see the total number of things that learner may have had reported, and even having topics give you visibility into that. So no matter what the lens you're using to navigate the discussion forums, you can see the moderator-focused perspective in that part of the discussions app. Building on the Learners tab, we're also thinking about ways to sort of help nominate community TAs in the workflow. So you can look at a student, look at their activity, and decide, you know what, I want to nominate them as a community TA, right? And they may actually help moderate in a more official capacity with expanded edit rules, rights in the forums to lower moderation cost for the MOOC. And so a workflow for people to be able to nominate community TAs and then have students be able to learn a little bit more about like, what does that mean? What is moderation best practice going to imply for me? And then decide to accept that nomination or not, means that hopefully we can expand the size of our moderation teams and do that by giving course teams visibility into who might be a good moderator. Similarly, I skipped this a little bit, but this also gives us the ability to do the opposite, which is look at behavior that is not positive or abusive or needs to be flagged, and you can shadow ban someone. That's also something we're looking into as well. For those unfamiliar with the term, shadow banning basically means you make it look to a learner like they're still a part of the discussion forum, so they still keep adding content, even if it's bad, but no one else sees their content. So they're sort of just talking to themselves, or in like other situations, only the people who have been banned are talking to each other. So it's like people who are posting abusive things talk to the other trolls, if you will. Other things we're adding to help elevate and make visible moderator activity is reasons for editing. So the ability for you to expect or request a reason for editing a post if you're a moderator. Is it to avoid answers or hints, or what's the issue that you're actually moderating this post for? And then when you're closing posts, similarly, what's the reason for closing the post? Duplicate, inappropriate, whatever the reason may be. because that then helps you build a log of moderator activities that you can review. All right, so there's a number of other things that we know we could do, and I suspect there's going to be a fair amount of future work that others may be able to contribute as well. So critically, as I alluded to earlier, we've not really cleaned up the full picture of our infrastructure. We're changing the user interface experience in the educator configuration. We've not really touched the backend, the Ruby-based backend, and we've not touched the fact that we're still connected into edX platform. Similarly, we've not yet made the discussions application work outside of its course context. So everything I talked about today is revolved in some ways around in-context course structure and everything else. Well, what does it look like for someone that wants to set up our discussions experience at the program level, if they're using programs, or at the platform level? Why not be able to use the same experience and let you have that be operating at those levels as well? So there's some amount of development work that we need to do to make it work for those levels as well. And we don't have any UI for configuring those levels of the platform either, so work to do there as well. Finally, discussions are also present in two other places. The Teams application has discussions, and within a team you can have those discussions, and it's connected to our discussion forum. And the mobile application also has native discussions. Both of those will need updates to better align it with what we've talked about today, because we've been focused mostly on the web experience, or the mobile web experience. So that's the quick summary. The work that we're doing is available for you to review in more detail on Confluence. The project documentation and meeting notes are available there for people to review, raise their hand, and say they'd like to be more involved. I made a bit.ly link there for the Confluence page that links to all the relevant resources. I realized that I don't have actually the exact Figma design collateral document that would give the community visibility into, in more detail, all the various design explorations and milestones and things. So I will, before these slides are shared out, replace that coming soon with the right link. So you'll have that as well. And we'll make sure it's linked from that Confluence page as well above. And for those interested in really getting into the weeds, you can take a look at the initiative also in Jira and follow along that way. But kind of in summary and wrap up before we move over to questions, really interested in people who have made changes to the discussion forums, figuring out how people who are looking to make contributions in the space can help us. There's a whole host of other things and where we think discussions can go in the future that I left out of today's conversation, in part because this is already an overwhelming enough set of changes to sort of wrap our heads around, but there are a bunch of really interesting places where discussions could go. So, so with that, I think we'll shift gears into questions. And it looks like we have a question here in the front.
Hi, will we have email notifications?
It's a good question. So right now, we're just focused on moderator emails. So emails that moderators and community TAs will get when there's reported content or when there's unanswered questions, and eventually when there's that third post type, the content issues. One of the challenges with notifications is sort of a question of if discussions invest in notifications, which is one of the top 5 requested things, right? Very commonly requested. Do we build it at the platform level, and then discussions is just the first user of it, in which case the project is big? Do we build just something quick and dirty that's only relevant for discussions, knowing that we're not solving for the platform case? And so far, where we've landed is there's so many challenges on moderation and core navigation, and even just the ability to do integrations with other tools, that we at least wanted the release valve of let you use whatever you want, because a lot of other tools have notifications. Then rebuild our experience so it matches parity against all those other ones in most of the other dimensions of experience, navigation, moderation. And then hopefully that could come next, but yeah, that's one of the challenges of that one. Awesome. Yeah, if you want to go ahead. Where possible, we'll give you mic for questions, just so that I don't have to repeat it, just for the virtual recording.
Okay, so since these are micro frontends, I'm guessing that you had to build some new APIs and stuff for this. So do we have documentation for that part?
Good question. So I believe the answer is yes, but I'd need to go back and double check sort of like what level that is. I don't know that it fully adheres to the like Swagger doc, OAP, and all this other stuff. So I think that before we consider the project done, that's certainly a thing we want to make sure is true. Yeah.
Good morning. And my next question is, what about the release at the moment supported micro frontend? When we try to integrate part of them, is always, sometimes frustrated. How is the status at the moment for the discussion forum?
It's a good question. I mean, I still think there's a lot to do in terms of like making it a lot easier to get micro front ends sort of out of the box in Open edX. To my knowledge, there's no one that's currently running or trying to run the discussions MFE. If people are trying to run it, they should definitely reach out to us on the Open edX Slack so we can help. It will be bumpy to start, undoubtedly, right? Like we've been trying to get the functionality, and that's the focus we've been working through now, which is why even the documentation we just talked about is not really fully there. So for anyone who's interested in setting that up and doing that, please do reach out, because we want to close those gaps, but we're about to enter, like the next month and a half is going to be like release for a bunch of the things that we've talked about today that have been in development for a while, just sort of the nature of how the development cycle worked for this. And so the team will be able to begin paying attention to those other threads once that core experience is there, and once we're just doing bug fixes and improvements before tackling any of those big infrastructure things I talked about earlier. Okay, there's a question over here.
Thanks. Just quick question. Anything around gamification? Because we've had learners who say, why should I bother? I don't get any credit. It's just, I don't see myself rising up a chart. Anything in that way?
That's a great question. So I alluded earlier to the fact that there's 5 of the top requested features, right? Notifications, mentions, discussion prompts, graded discussions, and I forgot the 5th one, right? So with the shift to in-context discussion, meaning that you don't have to configure discussion blocks, that doesn't mean that you're not going to have moments in courses where instructional designers or professors want to prompt or guide people towards some sort of discussion, right? So we do believe there's another discussion, either the existing discussion block that we have needs to be updated, or we need a different discussion block. We still don't know the answer there. That's around discussion prompts, meaning you add the text block for the question you want to ask, and then you're either guiding people to just create a post or create posts in that area of your course, or you want to guide people to respond and comment on your post. There's like 2 different kinds of discussion prompts, right? So like what that would do is that would place that discussion reference and prompt in context in the course flow, not just in that sidebar, right? So like slightly different use case to whether in-context discussion is available, and on those pages where you have discussion prompt blocks, you might not have the sidebar because you're focused on that prompt. Once that discussion prompt block exists, improving it to enable grading scheme mechanisms for, hey, I would like to give credit for someone responding to the post or engaging in the post, or this is the rubric or heuristic that you want to use for assessing someone's contribution, whether that's manual or automated. Like a lot of open questions on how to get to graded discussions, but that's how we're thinking about it right now. That's actually one of the initiatives that I mentioned, like that I was just going to cut for today and not mention, but like it is a commonly requested one. All right, question over here.
Just one more. I saw that. So you have the discussions micro frontend, but you have shown the kind of inline, or better said, side-by-side discussions. So I'm guessing that lives in the learning micro frontend.
Good question. So
Another version?
it does still live in the discussions MFE. So this is this new context discussion depends on the learning MFE, meaning the legacy course application and experience won't get the benefit of all the features in the learning MFE nor in context discussion. So we get into a world of all these MFE dependencies. But any other questions?
I've seen in other platforms that it's possible in the course to see the list of all the enrolled people. And it helps create a sense of classmates and team. Will it be possible here?
So for us, like the learner tab that we're adding, this is probably giving people, this learner activity page, which is the new tab in the navigation, is what we think that is going to mean for us. So this doesn't show you all enrolled students by default, but it shows anyone who's engaged in the discussion forums and has non-zero contribution to the discussion. So you're going to see all the personas that we looked at earlier, excluding Larry the Lurker and all the people who are just focused on the content. So anyone who's engaged in this aspect of the course would be here, but not everyone. So in some ways, the top of the learner tab is like a proto leaderboard without being called leaderboard or without implying that there's a leaderboard, right? So there's some visibility there.
Okay. But you can encourage people to say, okay, say hello in the forum and so you will see each other.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly believe there's something more targeted we could do around the introduction post type and how we want, like, that to me is a special post type that we could allow and create and enable in certain parts of the courses. There's a whole other, just like the discussion prompt, you guys are all like getting all the things that I cut. But it's, I think there's something really interesting about building like a tailored introduce yourself kind of experience that helps visualize like where in the world are you, where, just other interesting stuff. But we're not planning on doing that ourselves. And certainly if people are interested, we could figure out how to collaborate.
And another question, what about direct messages or private chats?
Wow. Nailed it. So two other post types I didn't talk about that are very early in exploration. One is called broadcast, and the other one is called intervention. And this is tricky because what I'm about to talk about overlaps with weekly highlight emails, the updates feature, the bulk email feature, a lot of other communication tools. So we begin to run into a situation where we have to figure out, like, what is the future of all those tools amongst these two post types that I'm describing, broadcast and intervention. The thought is that you might be able to have moderators or course staff create broadcast messages, either triggered by or linked to a specific part of the course structure, like when you complete week 1 or when you complete week 2 or when you whatever. And the broadcast is a post that you create nominally, but to a learner it comes in as an inbox message in a separate app. Behind the scenes, it's still the discussion experience is the idea. And the moderator looks at that broadcast and all the responses are any learners who replied to it, potentially, right? But that broadcast message, you could imagine serving the purpose of an announcement or a course content triggered message. Intervention is even more complicated than the broadcast post type because it's basically saying, I want to add a specific audience filter. I want to send out a broadcast that looks like it's a one-on-one message from an instructor to a student, but I want to only send it to people that got less than a 50% on this problem, or only, whatever the segmentation is, and that gets really crazy, and a lot of people have done really great stuff on how you build that segmentation and intervention layer. But however it is that you decide to expose audiences, right, those messages or intervention messages might also come across as a one-on-one message from an instructor to the student, and you might be able to look at, like, of people who got these interventions of like, hey, come back, it's been more than a week since we saw you, or hey, don't worry about the exam score on this, like you should practice this over here, or if you need help, join the office hours, or whatever you feel like is going to be the right instructor presence to communicate at that moment in time. Going back to this visual. But again, like that, everything I just described in the broadcast and intervention space is like really big. It's all like product direction, vision. We think this is the right way to go, but it hasn't really been validated or explored. So,
I'd like to know quickly an overview of the persona of the people who actively contribute to this work.
Do you mean from a development team standpoint or from the learners in the discussions experience?
I mean, who actively works, makes this happen?
Got it. So right now there's a team at OpenCraft that is doing engineering work. So Shidid is the lead for that group. There's also a group called the Infinity Squad, which is an edX squad and team, but it's made up of Arbisoft team members as well that are a part of the edX team. And then there's some other folks that are a part of the edX team on the user experience side. I didn't list everyone who's helping out on the partner support and data side. There's a whole host of other people that are helping there. And we've worked with a number of edX partners that are experts in the platform that have given us feedback on earlier mockups and revisions. But this is the core team that's been working on the project.
Hello. My question is kind of about the sidebar discussions / the discussion prompts that sounded like they were in the future.
Yeah.
So we have quite a large catalog of content that leverages the current in-context discussion block. We really are excited about the changes that are coming up. It sounds like there might be a gap between us having to transition our content to not use discussion prompts in the context of the rest of the content on the page,
yep,
while we use the new sidebar, and then potentially move back to using more in-context discussion prompts. Do I have the timeline right?
Yeah, so I'll give a little bit more detail to this. And for people that adopt the new MFE, I mentioned earlier that there's a preview mode. So similarly, some of the work we're doing on rolling out the in-context discussions will have ways for people to follow or echo the rollout process that we used, or just do it your own way. But what we're thinking about first right now, and the team is still literally writing and exploring all these different choices here for this milestone and rollout, is enable this new model of default on in-context discussion for all new courses. From that moment on, after this day, every new course that's created would use this. Then the next question is, for a course that exists and is rerun or whatever the case may be, what's the path for them choosing to migrate to using the new structure? And so there, we are thinking that in the discussion settings, giving people the option to toggle on in-context discussion, at that moment in time, you get to a workflow that says, currently you're using this many in-context discussions or none, or we can automatically switch you from the old way of doing topics to the new way, but these are the things that will happen. All the topics will now be organized across this. If you have a discussion block that was organized however you organized it, week 2, whatever, however you did it with a discussion block, we would be saying those distinctions are going away, and they'll now be all the posts that may exist already or that will exist in that area will just now be aligned to the new topic based on the name of what part of the course they're in. The most complicated section is people that have multiple discussion prompts in one page, hierarchy they don't want to go away. That's the hardest part. That's less than 3% or something. I forget the number of courses are in that space. So what we're hopeful to do is get the rest of it all figured out. And if someone in that situation tries to enable in-context discussion, we would say hey, we don't yet support your course for these reasons, and we then figure out what to do. I'm worried that we won't be able to do the last section without having the discussion prompt kind of concept, because some of the things we've seen is a lot of those courses tend to do very specific prompting, and that's why the hierarchy matters very particularly for them, and they're not okay with just switching it. Awesome. I think maybe we'll have one. Okay. Yeah, so the back end's not changed, so we're just changing the front end right now. It's all right now focused on front end. So, yeah, so I think we're at time. Thanks, everyone. We'll still be here, but that's the end of our recorded session.